Alright, everybody, it's finally time to end 2025 as we're coming to the end of February of 2026. For today's video, this is going to be the final part of my favorites of 2025. It's at long last time to get to the best of show. So, which game stood out above all the others, and how the heck did I narrow this all down from the over 200 games I played in the year? Since we switched from a top 3 to just kind of favorite games of each category, it's meant that each individual episode has gotten far larger, and also let me cover more games. But it's also let me with a very interesting challenge. For the best in show, I have so many games that we've mentioned that it's a lot harder to kind of narrow it down. Do I just once again talk about all the other games that we mentioned over the last how many parts this series has gotten to? So I came with a way of kind of limiting myself and making it a little bit more challenging. That for this final episode, and I think going forward, at most, I'm only going to be talking about 5 games. So 5 out of the over the 200 that we played. And I wanted to do this because, one, to keep this from being too long, and to really kind of give a distinction between the games I liked and the games that I really, really enjoyed. Whether it's due to their gameplay, their design, or all the above. Before we get to that, here is the quick recap of all the games mentioned in the previous episodes. Level design is one of the more understated aspects of being able to study game design. You can put platforms all over the place, you can set up traps and all the cycles you want, but the differences between good, bad, and masterclass level design are often very specific, or they're very hard to tell. We've played tons and tons of platformers and shooters and action games, and making it feel great to explore a level or explore the space is something that really separates great games from the masterclass examples. So my first kind of best in show pick, I'm giving it to Ooh. Once again, Ooh is a puzzle platformer that has you exploring a giant bird whose insides are just platforming levels. What the game does spectacularly is tie player knowledge to the path and pacing of the game. The more you know, the further you can get, and the game doesn't stop to give you a Force tutorial, and beyond just the initial upgrades, it pretty much is all about you figuring out what are the limits of your abilities. And it ties level design and the individual kind of gameplay itself really well in that regard. When you complete a section, it's not about rewarding the player the gold star, but about the player figuring out, oh, I can make use of this, I can do this now. And then suddenly another room becomes a lot easier. And kind of expanding out to the entire world, there's so much in terms of these like aha moments of how you explore and how things change. One of the parts I really enjoy is how fast traveling, which is oftentimes just used as a quality of life feature, becomes a major part of the platforming and the puzzle design as you get near the end of the game. And it's just full of like all these great aha moments because of it. So with Ooh, it is just a great example of how much fantastic level design can elevate a game, and why there's more to platforming than just walking left to right, maybe right to left, and doing a little jumping here and there. So this one, again, is a great study for puzzle designers as well, with how you can overlay or teach the player through the expression of level design, and how it never really like steps on its own toes in terms of trying to challenge a player while still making sure they're ready for it. Just by exploring getting to the end is all the proof the player has or the player will need to know they're ready to do the next thing and to explore things further. So again, just a phenomenal game, and one that I'm still thinking about even as we're in 2026. As I said in the Metroidvania section, Hollow Knight Silksong is a game that everyone is talking about, and they're going to continue talking about into 2026. A few of you are probably going to be talking about down in the comments because it's not getting in the best of show category. As I've said frequently in the past, that when it comes down to games of the same genre, I will always give a little extra nod to the one that does something different. And my pick, of course, is the incredibly challenging and very original Zexion. As I said in the initial part about it, Zexion is just an amazing example of Metroidvania design. Very wide open world, some of the more interesting and varied enemy and boss designs we've seen from a Metroidvania, and yes, even comparing that to Hollow Knight and, of course, Silksong. While the game doesn't have, I think, the same level of like creature comforts and kind of like guiding the player as Silksong does, it makes up for that with just being a very original challenge from beginning to end. The fact that it came already with a randomizer and additional stuff to do to get the true ending is definitely another feather in the cap. What this game does that kind of puts it above all the other examples that we played a lot of Metroidvanias, is just how well the game's kind of pathos of providing with an incredibly varied world and a lot of challenges to build your own skill set works. That it makes it so, once again, every single missile upgrade, every single health up, every new room with an item in it is just another way of making yourself more powerful and start to catch up and then overtake the sheer number of enemies and challenges the world has in store. Definitely some of the more, again, interesting bosses that we've seen. And I hope that we see more from the developer in this respect. In a year of amazing and varied Metroidvanias, Zexion just stands slightly above all the others, in my opinion, for doing something that doesn't quite feel like it is, being built off of something that we've already seen before, despite, again, the obvious Metroid inspirations. So it once again gets a very high recommendation from me, as a game that once again shows just how far you can take the evolving nature of Metroidvania design and provide a variety of challenges, locales, and enemies for the player. Returning to the puzzle genre, my next pick is one that by now should be very obvious. It is perhaps one of the most original puzzle games we've seen in a very long time, and that is Blueprints. And while I didn't get all the true bonus, post, optional, extra hard puzzles done, it is still a phenomenal example of puzzle design, and also just an amazing example of game design. Being able to tie a game, or tie a puzzle game, to a roguelite nature in of itself is an award-winning concept alone. I love this idea of combining roguelike elements into other genres, and it doesn't really feel forced in this respect. There are perhaps lesser examples of a game of Blueprints where it would just feel like you're going through the motions, and that the roguelike elements just are there like tacked on. But Blueprints does a fantastic job of weaving it all together. That every run you have is another way of learning something new about the world, learning something new about the lore, figuring out a new use of the rooms. And that having the kind of golden run approach to get to the final room is a phenomenal challenge. And then having all these additional layers on top of it for the real, puzzle sickos in the audience is just amazing. I don't think we are going to see another puzzle game quite like Blueprints for a very long time, although I can guarantee you that there are developers right now, much like with Balatro and Vampire Survivors before it, are eagerly trying to achieve that challenge of making the next Blueprints-like, or however we're going to define this subgenre going forward. Again, like Ooh that I mentioned a few minutes ago, just an amazing masterclass of how puzzle, level, and game design can all come together. And while it is certainly not going to be everyone's cup of tea, it is still a fantastic look at how you can iterate and evolve puzzle gameplay, beyond again just throwing more rooms or more tiles at the player. So another genre where there were just so many great examples of it, but again, I'm going to have to give it a game that just really hit like 27 home runs with its design. Deck building and deck builders have never quite kind of fell out of fashion, despite people who I know who are sick and tired of building their umpteenth deck to take on a run. So to get a game that took deck building into more of the Souls-like variety was a really great change of pace. So my next pick goes to Death Howl. We played this one for several, I think, weeks, maybe like a month or two. And what I really loved about this game was once again just kind of recontextualizing a deck builder into more of a single player narrative. The kind of world inferring or affecting the deck building is a very different change of pace. Again, when we look at most deck building roguelikes, you're kind of rolling with the punches of building whatever, patchwork deck that you can imagine. But for a game to just say, no, if this area requires you to use this specific strategy, then you are building a deck or you will suffer. The world, again, having almost like a sense of pacing and structure to it, which is not something that we see from a lot of deck builders, is also another important point. That you have to plan your route out accordingly, seeing how far you can push things, where's the next checkpoint, and of course building ever more unique and original cards from each of its styles. I like that the final challenge is basically letting you cut loose and build your deck. It is by far one of the more harder games out there, especially for deck building fans, and I know they did balance and make things a little bit easier after we of course got through the whole game. But this is another great example of how you can take a genre and design that everyone knows and turn it on its head in a very original way. I am definitely interested in what they will come up with next, and if there will be more content for Death Howl in the future. So, again, another amazing game, and while we are going to have to see how Slay the Spire 2 turns out in the next few days, But I do hope people don't forget about the more challenging Souls-like take on deck building. For my final pick of Best of Show, this is a game that managed to stand out for me from all the varieties of shooters and horror games we played in 2025. And 2025 brought with it a lot of interesting kind of examples of horror. Some games trying to be more retro-minded, some trying to move the story or move the needle forward, and some that were just, again, love letters to whatever games they were inspired by when they were growing up. But for my final pick, I'm giving it to Total Chaos. As I said in the first part when we mentioned horror, as someone who really loved Condemned's kind of like knockdown brawl style when it came to combat in a survival horror setting, Total Chaos worked for me. I just really love how unpredictable the enemies were, and that in of itself, I think is what really pushed it above and beyond for me for 2025. Because we've played horror games like Heartworm, like Silent Hill F, and of course a lot of the more kind of psychological or more like slower paced takes. But for a lot of these games that had enemies in them, it always felt once again that I'm battling a computer. I'm battling an enemy with a fixed set of patterns, a fixed routine. It's just me doing the same thing over and over again until they die or I die. With Total Chaos, there was an unpredictability to the enemies, that they can dodge, they can throw stuff at you, they can counter you. And this is what I want to see out of more horror games. That it's not about putting the player in a room with 50 enemies and saying, ooh, it's scary. But about making just one, maybe 2 or 3 enemies a nightmare to fight, while still making it feel good to fight them. As I said when I reviewed Silent Hill F, or when I talked about it, it just felt way too clunky. That they wanted to have their cake and eat it too. We're going to make a more action-focused take on Silent Hill. But it's still going to be very slow and stilted. And yes, the enemies will be able to have these incredibly elaborate attack combos. But you get, your parry move. With Total Chaos, which does also have a parry ability, it is just all about high stakes. Do you risk your favorite weapon to break it to kill an enemy? Or do you want to go through more of your resources? It's a game I do want to go back to, and again, I want to see more developers have this more kind of, beatdown focus on their horror combat. That's not about for the 1000th time standing perfectly still, aiming a shotgun up and hitting an enemy in the head, and that's your entire state of combat. I want a game where it is about you just picking up any random piece of trash that's around the environment and flinging it or smashing into an enemy with the hope that you knock it out before it gets that one lucky hit in. So again, kudos to the developer for Total Chaos, and I do once again hope that we see more developers be inspired by this game, or again just try and do something differently with horror. That it's not about making you run around with 27 guns, 18 axes, 57 grenades, nor is it about you just having no ability to react to the enemy and you're just kind of playing a little game of cat and mouse. That there is more room and nuance for horror, with giving the player the means of interacting with the world, with the enemies, and still making it terrifying for them to walk into a room despite the fact that they're holding a giant 2x4 in one hand, a shotgun on the other hand, and an entire inventory of healing. Because if you can make the player still feel tense with all those resources, then you have done your job right. And with that, I can officially declare 2025 is now over. So what were your absolute favorite games of 2025? Which games do you think I'm a shill for not mentioning? Let me know down in the comments. And we are done for a little under a year. So come back at some point when we do our best of 2026 list, which will probably be done by 2028. And with that, have a great night, and see everyone for a lot more video games, game design talks, and more for the new year. coming soon. Thanks for watching, and a special thank you to our Patreon supporters. If you enjoyed the video, do the YouTubing stuff, be sure to visit our Discord and Patreon, and you're interested in more of my thoughts on design, check out my game design books.